I have a devotional, something God gave me. Lord, I want this to be your words. I want this to be clear. Help people to understand. In Jesus' name, amen. The scripture, if you want to read along, I use the New Living Translation. I was raised on the King James. I like the New Living Translation for understanding. But we're in Joshua, the book of Joshua, chapter 4. We'll be reading a few verses from the beginning of that. But the topic that God has kind of given me to work with here is the idea of the monuments, the memorials in our life. And there are things that we're building intentionally, things that we're building unintentionally, and then there are the things that God has erected in our lives, and God has clearly, like a thunderbolt from heaven, made so clear that we can't question them. And each of them are monuments, memorials, things for us to look back on, to think back on, and also, as we're going to read, to be a remembrance, a point to focus on for those that follow us, for those children, for those generations behind us. The work that we put in for God and for building these things, good or bad, often remains and goes far beyond what we can even imagine. And what is our focus in this? If you read the book of Joshua, it's an inspiring book in many ways, and there are many things. It's said that Joshua is the only one in the Bible you can't find any sin recorded about. Of course, when you write your own book, it's easier to do that. But he did record things. He was a faithful servant of Moses, and he was very close to God. If you read through the Pentateuch, you would know this. And God gives him directions. Here's how to go into Canaan. But one of the things we find out, if you go back to chapter 1, chapter 2, no one in Israel had been circumcised from the moment they crossed the Red Sea until they're ready to cross into Canaan. So for those years, 40 years, something like that, in the desert, the years of wandering, the years of people being buried in the desert for their sin, everyone born after crossing the Red Sea had not been circumcised. And that's a big deal because at this point, God has given two things to the nation of Israel. Well, three actually. The first one goes back to Abraham, and it's the circumcision. And it is important because Canaan is the promised land to Abraham through God, through the covenant, and the sign of the covenant was circumcision. The next one, Passover. And they're to keep that. And that's important, and that's to keep in their minds fresh. God destroyed Egypt. He did all these plagues, and I'm sure there's something you're supposed to talk about during this. You talk about their suffering. You talk about the food symbolizes different things that's used in Passover today. And it all goes back to God giving deliverance. So there's a second sign. Then the third one, of course, is the law. They have the tabernacle. They have all that stuff. But those three things, well, one of those three things, and the key one, in knowing that you are in the family of Abraham and knowing that you are joined into the covenant, they had not kept. All of these, they're now men. They're 40 years old, some of them, and under, are not circumcised. And Joshua's like, that's it. We all got to be circumcised. Every man. It should have happened 7 days after you were born. And we're going to start that again. So there's a memorial again. We have the Passover is set up as a memorial. Now there is this circumcision, this preparation for entering the land promised to those who are circumcised because they want to follow in the covenant God gave with Abraham. They had to be prepared. So there's a preparation. And I'm sure they remembered that too. It's not stressed very highly or deeply. It just talks about they did it. Took a few days to recover. But there is a monument to obedience that God wanted from them. And so now they come to the next great miracle. Many of them, it's the first great miracle they're going to see in their lives. And other than the manna and the water in the desert and all these other things. But the things that happen every day and you grow up with, you don't catch the meaning of so many times. This one, though, in chapter 3, the priests march down to, Israel's gone through these 3 days of preparation. They've cleansed themselves. They've washed their clothes. They're all ready. They've not defiled themselves. There's all these different things they had to do. The priests start marching. They have the Ark of the Covenant. And when their feet step what would have been into the river, into the water, boom, no more water. The water just flows on down and no more comes down the river. And if you're in Canaan and you have your strong fortified cities and everything else, this is a big deal because this is the time of year the Jordan is in flood. They didn't think that anybody could cross this river, at least not with an army. Maybe a couple of guys sneaking across like the spies did. But not an army, not this time of year. Well, guess what? An army just walked across your dry river that you thought was in flood and you didn't have to worry about. And so we get here at chapter 4. When all the people had crossed the Jordan, we're talking millions of people. This is not just, a crowd of 10, 20. There's only, I think, 10 is all we are allowed right now in churches because of the virus. This is millions of people and their animals and wagons and everything you can imagine being carried and driven and right into Canaan. They're here to stay. And when all the people, Joshua chapter 4 and verse 1, when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them out. Pile them up in the place where you will camp tonight. So Joshua called the 12 men together. And the Lord gives this to Joshua. Build a monument. Build a memorial. Make sure it's memorable. So he gets 12 men. He picks one from each tribe. And he says, go right down where the priests are standing in the bottom of that river. Get the biggest boulder you can. Put it on your shoulder. We're talking not just a little rock. Not just something you can skip. These are the big boulders you find down in the river. Get one of them. And I'm sure he picked some big, strong, husky guys, not little scrawny guys. And he says, the biggest rock you can get, and remember, they're representing their tribe, and they don't want to be outdone by the other tribes, so each of them is going to be like, you ever watch those strongman competitions? I imagine them getting boulders like that. And they carry that big old rock up out of the river. And they carry it to where they were going to camp that night. Who knows how far that is from the river. And they erect a monument with these massive stones. 12 of them. Piled or placed or whatever to represent God parted the waters and we carried those rocks there from the middle of the river. And that's something they can go back and show their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And this is part of God laying out what was supposed to keep Israel strong. And I imagine when they traveled by there, people still would, Dad, what's that pile of rocks for? Oh, that's a memorial. That's where, and you could tell the story to your children. And then Joshua also set up, this isn't one that God told him. So in verse 8, you see Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan River, one for each tribe, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried him to the place where they camped for the night and constructed the memorial there. Joshua also set up, in verse 9, another pile of 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day at the writing of the book of Joshua. If they're still there today, that is another miracle. But they were there when this book of Joshua was written. Joshua wanted this recorded, and I imagine in the dry season when the river was low, these rocks stuck up out of the water and people passing by. There's Joshua's monument to the crossing. He didn't build that when there was water, and they didn't have to have cranes or anything else. Those guys marched right down and boom, dropped those rocks right in place and built that monument. And they didn't even get wet. They were a little sweaty and dirty, but they weren't wet. And he wanted this to be a memorial, to make it known to people so they would not forget, so they would tell their children and their grandchildren. And there are things in our lives. We need to build those memorials. That's what testimony is all about. That's what sharing what God has done for you, what he delivered you from. If he's delivered you from an addiction, if he saved your life, if he raised you up from a deathbed. There are people that have visions of heaven, and some of them I think sound genuine. Now, don't base your faith on them. But they are given to us to be an encouragement. I truly believe God sends people back to this world. My father is one of those who has had some sort of vision and met Jesus in it. And he was out on an operating table, and they had stopped his heart. And he had to come back because he wasn't done here. That's what was said to him. And now I don't base all my faith on everything he said and all that. I believe, I have my own reasons. God built some memorials in my life. As a child, growing up in this church, I saw, in camp meetings, I saw God move in such a way I could never, ever doubt he is real, doubt he is powerful, doubt that he saves, doubt that he delivers. I've had my own problems in my own life, and he's helped me, he's saved me, he's delivered me. I talked about it. I was in a car accident, and I should not have survived. The vehicle was totaled. Everything was thrown around. Stuff fell out on the road. The car almost rolled over, came back down on all four wheels, went across a busy highway, didn't touch anybody, ended up in the breakdown lane out of the way, and I was not in control. I had bonked my head on the window, and I sort of saw everything, but I was completely in a daze. And when everything came to a stop and the vehicle stopped shaking, one of my school textbooks was balanced on top of the steering wheel, just sitting there. I could not do that without a good few minutes of, nope, a little bit, nope. It was balanced, just sitting there. But there's more things than that. I can talk about when God called me to preach. He spoke to me. It was an audible voice, is what I would say. And I was at an altar, at a camp meeting. I was praying for something else, seeking something else. And he spoke to me 3 words as if he was standing right next to me. I heard them. It was speak for me. That's what he said. And of course, because I swear he was right here on my right. I'm kneeling at the altar, and I swear he was standing on my right, and I'm wondering who said that. And I look, and there's no one there. And there was no one for 20, 30 feet away from me on that side. And I can tell you people who were there. And they could say that if they remember it, I was there praying. And he spoke the rest of it to me in my heart, the way that he most often speaks to people. But he gave me a memorial, and I can tell you, I would doubt that he called me to preach. I would doubt sometimes the things that I've dealt with, the struggles I've had, the getting into preaching without going to Bible school or an internship and all these different things. And I would come back to doubt it, but I can never forget those words. He built a memorial for me right there I can never, ever forget it. I can still remember the way they sounded. I can remember how they felt. When God speaks, it hits you. It's a whole different thing. And he's erected other more memorials since then. Some with good things, some with bad things. My oldest daughter is about to graduate high school. The day we found out she was going to be our first child, we were parents for the first time. Exciting day, September 11th, 2001. And I worked for an airline. It was a scary day. It was a very frightening day. As the day wore on, it was not quite so frightening. Then I had my wife call me and say, "Guess what? Congratulations, Dad." Talk about mixed emotions. Talk about how can we bring a child into this world? But through that, God built another memorial. And she's now 18. She's going to be 18 in a couple of days here. She's about to graduate high school. God has kept us. God has kept her. He's provided. He's taken care. And there's a memorial that he brought me back to. I don't always think of it, but he brought me back to thinking of this virus and now graduating high school and What a crazy time to graduate. What a crazy time to enter the world and be considered an adult. And she can't find a job. Well, here we went and got her a driver's license, and we're ready to give her a car because she's going off to Bible school next year. And she wanted to get a job to make some money to help, and nobody's hiring right now. At least not somebody that's brand new. There's a lot of people unemployed. It's not a good time to do this, but if God kept us through that, he'll keep us through this. He built a monument there so that we can trust. And we've been through another one. We lost a child. Our third child, my wife had actually gone and gotten an ultrasound at the pregnancy center. They needed expectant mothers to train their ultrasound technicians on, and they use that as a tool to help save babies. Once a mother sees the baby in the womb, they're very unlikely to still go through with killing that child. And my wife was pregnant, and they needed pregnant women to test on, and my wife had volunteered at another pregnancy center, so they were very happy to have her there. And she went in, and she saw the baby, and then a couple weeks, can you come back in again? And sure, so we went in, and we have pictures, and I was there, we brought the children, and we all got to see the baby. We were so excited. We had 2 children at that point. And the next week, my wife goes to the doctor for her regular appointment, and there's no heartbeat. You talk about devastated emotionally. God, how could you allow this? Why? He built a monument out of that, even with our grief, even with our sorrow, and it's something we've been able to help others who are dealing with issues and loss and not understanding with, and God had a plan. He made it work. I don't understand exactly why it happened. There was a virus that went through our family, and unfortunately, if you're pregnant, it will probably kill the baby unless they're close to birth. And then there's some emergency surgeries they can do right at birth to save the child's life. But it was too early for that. And God allowed that pain, but it built a monument. It built a memorial. It doesn't hurt me the same way it did then, because now I can see we've been blessed with 2 more children. And we wouldn't have our third child if we hadn't lost this other one. And we just have to trust and believe that God had a purpose in it. The child we have now, he has a purpose for. He has a plan that's greater. And through that pain, and one of the events that goes along with that, and I witnessed it, it was incredible. We actually had my mother-in-law and father-in-law with us. We had traveled. This is, the dead baby is still inside my wife, and hopefully we're hoping her body will take care of getting rid of it. Ultimately, she had to get a surgery to have it removed. And during that time of waiting, her parents had been scheduled to come up, so they were up. We took them, went over into the White Mountains, and we were driving home. And it had been a beautiful day. It had turned to rain, but it was an interesting rain. And as we're driving, this incredible rainbow just sort of came down, and it was like it was so close we could almost touch it. It followed us. Is the only way I can say what we saw. This rainbow off to our left. And I even stopped and got a picture of it at one point, and you can see through it. There are people behind it. There was a lake, and just a small lake, and across this lake, a couple of people that looks like they were getting ready to go canoeing, and the rain caught them. So they're hiding under the trees, and you can see them in the background across this lake. And at that point, the rainbow had come down and turned into a circle. And that circle of rainbow followed us for like 45 minutes. And I'm talking at one point, the highway goes through a cut in the rock, and it's pretty deep. It's a canyon. I don't know if it was blasted. There is a river that runs through there, but probably they widened it. And we're driving through, and every so often I would kind of crane my head and look up through the windshield. Of course, everybody, pay attention to the road! And that rainbow was over us. Now, my mother's a physics teacher. She can tell you how the angles work for rainbows and the way light refracts off of rain and all these other things. And I described it to her, and she said some of those angles should not have worked. You should not have been able to see a rainbow. But that rainbow followed us. And I really feel like it was a promise from God. It was a sign of healing. My wife, it really meant something. She saw another one as well. I don't think I saw that one. But this one, we were all there. We all witnessed it. It was real. It became a memorial. It became a reminder. And you think of the promise of God with the rainbow, I will not destroy the world again with a flood. And the idea that I'm in control. I'm protecting. I'm taking care, even through this loss of a child, which I still can't tell you exactly why, but God is good, and I have to trust him. And when he builds these memorials, there is a reason, there is a purpose. And my wife was able to share this recently and actually bless the people at this pregnancy center who she had never told the story to until just, here we're talking, I don't know, 12 some years, whatever, later, and blessed them with it, and other women as well she's told the story to, and it's been an encouragement that even in those things, God built a monument for us to remember, to look back on, to encourage others with. If you live in a city, I live here in the city of Haverhill, right down the street, there's a memorial for the Civil War, and go a little bit further, there's a memorial to General Lafayette from France, who helped us win the American Revolution. And there's a Korean War one down here, and there's one that goes back to when this was just a colony. And this Haverhill was the frontier, and this woman was abducted and managed to get away from the natives that had captured her and make it back. There's a statue to her. And these are memorials that they're put up for different historical reasons, but they're to remind us. They're to encourage, to help, there are different purposes to put them up. When God builds memorials in your life, he gives them to you to help others, to remind, and so often it is to remind us of his providence, his care, his taking care of us. The way that he is working behind the scenes before we ever realize what's going on. These memorials, now, and I also talked about you build memorials. Joshua had these 12 men build a memorial according to the plan of God at the place they camped. He also had them build a monument in the center of the river, and I don't see in here that God told them to do that, but Joshua wanted them to remember. This was an intentional monument. This was for a purpose, for a plan, to be a reminder. And I think of people I've known in my life and the blessings it was to me to see more mature, older people who had served God for years and dedicate their life to serving him. And one man out of all the people I can think of right now that really stuck out to me, and I think of it, is actually my wife's grandfather. I actually attended the church that he did, and my wife did as well. Before I really knew her as anybody but one of the other students at the school, we weren't friends, we didn't talk. She had another boyfriend, and it was not God's time for the two of us to be together. But her grandfather and grandmother attended that church, and they had been founding members, and in fact, her grandfather had helped build the building. I didn't find that out till later. But the thing that impressed me about him is he was friendly. I mean, not everybody is friendly to Bible school students who kind of come and go and they change all the time. He was friendly. He'd say hi, act like he was interested. He'd talk. And you could tell he loved God. You could tell he had a devotion in his life to serving God. And, you know, some of the things I remember about him, he played apparently a bunch more instruments than I ever knew, but he played the mandolin and he played the accordion, and a couple times, like usually right before Christmas, they would get a whole orchestra of accordions or a whole orchestra of these mandolins together to play some Christmas carols in the service. And it was just one of those incredible memories. I remember seeing that, and then after I was married to her and going back and seeing that again until he was finally not able to play anymore, and getting to know him through that, and his intentional walk with God had built a monument that to a younger man made an impression. And of course, it became much more meaningful to me when I married his granddaughter and I got to know him better that way. And had a little bit more of a relationship than we did before. But in seeing that, in seeing someone who is devoted to God, and I can think of lists of other people. He's just the first one that really stuck out to me, and not a preacher, not a loud, outspoken, flamboyant, the opposite, quiet, but the type of people who do the work and get things done. And their life speaks, and there's a testimony there. Now, there's also the monuments we build that we don't want to build. Things come from habit, things that come from us doing the wrong thing over and over and over. Sometimes it comes when we know better, and that's a sin. And sometimes it's when we don't know. The light hasn't been given to us. You're not a Christian. You don't know God. You know a little bit, but not enough, and God hasn't revealed it yet. And those things are the ones, and you see it in the Bible, where they had to go and they had to destroy things. They had to get rid of them. Moses in the wilderness had made a brass serpent and put it up on a pole, and if anyone bit by a snake had looked at it, they were healed. Well, they carried that with them. That was a treasure. That was a monument. It was a memorial. Unfortunately, they began to worship it instead of God. They worshiped this snake. And it became a snare. And eventually, one of the leaders of Israel had to destroy it. Gideon, great man of God. You want to talk about memorials. 300 men with pitchers and torches and trumpets and swords drive out this huge, unnumberable host of people from the land of Israel and win a great victory. And Gideon goes on to rule and to lead. And at one point, he became wealthy, and he built the breastplate that the priest had out of precious stones and gold and things like that. And it became something that Israel lusted after and sought after instead of God. And it became a stumbling block. It was, whatever the reason it was put together, there was a great memorial that should have been kept and remembered. Gideon and his great deliverance through the power of God, not through the power of his army. But this other thing became the memorial that was a bad thing. And I don't remember if it was destroyed or not, but it became a stumbling block, something that tripped up people. And we always need to be careful what memorials we're building. In our life, the things devoted to God are a memorial, even in the things you don't think about, like leading in your family in prayer, instructing your children, teaching them. You're building memorials. You're building a foundation. You're instructing and building patterns that God will use. Unfortunately, they'll also see the other things you do, the things that aren't Christian, the way you speak, the way you talk, the way you act, and they pick up on that too. And they build a memorial that's not godly, that's not good, that will cause them to stumble, that will probably be something they're going to have to overcome through God as well. And we need to be careful. Build the monuments for God intentionally. That is the big thing. Joshua did this monument intentionally, and he set it up. And when they went into the land, they looked at what Moses had been directed by God to give, and the casting of lots, the division of land. They put up these stone markers to show the corners of this land is given to this man and this land is given to this man. And one of the prophets, I can't remember which one, but there's a warning in there that talks about don't go out and move those landmarks. Don't go out and remove them. Because apparently people were doing that to get a little bit extra land. Kind of go out at night and down. How'd they get on the other side of that? I thought, but they had taken away what God had put there. And we need to be careful about that too. There's things to look at. But go back. Ask God to show you. And he gives these to us to remember, so we remember him. And that's the important thing. Go back to those monuments. There are times in our lives, like Jacob, Bethel. I'm going to do one on that. But Bethel played a prominent role all the way through the Old Testament. Again and again, it's not mentioned in the life of Jesus because Bethel, house of God, Jesus was there. He is the house of God. But Jacob, he's running away. He has the dream of the angels. He realized God is in this place. He names it Bethel. He comes back. He's got a lot. He wrestles with God. He has all that kind of stuff. And then his family becomes wicked, is really what you'd have to say. And God is like, you need to go back to Bethel, back to where you built that altar to me, and start over. And sometimes that's why we have to do that too. Go back to those monuments, and God puts them there for a reason, and remember them, share them in testimonies, one-on-one. God gave them to you to remind you, and he gives them to you to share with others, to be an encouragement. And that's the great thing. Be an encouragement and share what God did. That is the greatest thing that you can ever share. What God has done with you, through you, and to others. Be encouraged.